This might be an awful idea because I'm right next to all of my computer stuff, but it's been a long time coming, hoes. I'm like scared. Woo! No hole in my ceiling, so that's good. Cheers, everyone. I officially submitted my first law school applications for 2022. Woo! So I still have, I think I only have 4 left because I need to finish some scholarship essays and stuff, but I've submitted a majority of my essays, and so I'm celebrating and coping with the fact that I spent $1,000 on law school applications. It is a very expensive process. There are fee waivers if you qualify for them, so if you do, seriously do it. Go for it. Cheers to us, to everyone who is applying. You put in a bunch of work. Good for you. You and I should both celebrate the fact that we have done all that effort, studied for the LSAT or the GRE, depending on whatever you took, and just be happy that we made it this far, you know? Because sometimes it's hard to celebrate the little wins, and I personally have an issue doing that, for sure. But now it's out of my hands, so cheers to us, and best of luck. Alright, I officially just submitted my last 2 apps. Sorry, there's a car outside. So I'm officially done applying to schools this year. That's nuts. But yeah, I finished my last 2 apps, which were UCLA and NYU. They took a little bit of extra time just because I was doing some scholarship essays that I wanted to make sure I finessed and put just as much work into those as I did my personal statement and other stuff. Because, you know, law school's expensive. So scholarship would be great. But yeah, it's October 5th at 6:50, and so I'm officially done. I submitted a majority of my apps on October 2nd, wrapped these ones up, and now I'm done. So the waiting game begins, and I'll record the admissions process if I get any interviews or calls or updates or have to submit additional materials, just so you can all get insight on what that is like, because I know last year it was a lot more effort than just these apps. I was waitlisted a lot, so wrote a lot of letters of continued interest. But yeah, hopefully this year will be a little more smooth. I can give you more insight into what the process would be normally. I don't know. I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to be done. Scholarship essays are always so weird to me because you have to like talk about your life in a way that is academic and like kind of weird, you know, like talking about the obstacles and things you've been through in a way that maybe you haven't processed yet. So that's always kind of funky. I feel like I was an appropriate level of vulnerable, you know, because a lot of the times they were about like challenges or things you overcome. So we'll see how the admissions decision video goes and find out from there, I guess. Thank you guys so much. It's honestly been so great. I think we're almost at 200 subscribers, which is crazy. But just to see the channel grow and see people get involved and celebrate. I started this process in COVID, and it was pretty lonely and isolating. So it's been really fun to be on the internet and meet other queer people and other non-traditional students and just hear what you all are going through. So feel free, sound off in the comments below. Hopefully this can be a community and resource that is helpful and uplifting, because I know the first resource I turned to was Reddit, which can be helpful, but can also feel very, I don't know, what's the word? It can feel very disparaging. I literally can't think of the word. Disheartening, I guess, is a good one. But don't compare yourself to other people. It's okay, do your best. Put as much effort as you can into these things, and let's be the next generation of empathetic lawyers who want to make a difference. So, see you in the updates, I guess. Okay, what up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Tyler. I'm a aspiring queer lawyer who makes hopefully educational and helpful content in a space that I found can be very stressful. So yeah, the whole point of the content I make is to hopefully represent queer voices and also just combat some of the really intense productivity mindset, because I know this process can be very stressful. The lighting is changing a lot outside my apartment. I don't know what's going on. So if the lighting gets weird in here, just ignore it. So if that sounds interesting to you, please like, subscribe, and click the bell. It's been super fun to read your comments and get your DMs, hear about everyone's different process for trying to go to law school or studying for the LSAT or, you know, wherever you're at. And so based off the clips you just watched, watched. You know, I just submitted my applications for 2022, so I'm super excited. Do not be stressed out if you haven't gotten your apps in yet. Oh my gosh, it's getting so dark. Don't be stressed out if you haven't gotten your apps in yet. It's early. I didn't apply until February last cycle, so I'm a reapplicant. That's also part of the reason I was able to apply so much earlier this year. Today's video is going to focus on my application, so we'll run through everything from GPA transcript stuff to personal statement and addendums. Just for context, I did apply in fall of 2021. I was waitlisted at over 50% of the schools I applied to. With my stats at the time, it wasn't really bad, honestly, but I just knew retaking and reapplying made the most sense for me. This is my second time applying. I'm going to talk through, though, things I learned that will be helpful for anyone, whether it's your first time applying or you're also a reapplicant. So hopefully just, you know, this is all my experience. Take it with a grain of salt. They're just things that I've learned, things I tried to keep in mind, and hopefully in the future we can see if my updated applications paid off this year. So, okay, so first off, all of your apps include essentially a resume, personal statement, biographical information that you'll fill out through LSAT. You need a CAS registration, which I do believe there's a fee, but it lasts for 5 years, so mine was still valid. And then your transcripts and the LSAT report that LSAC will send. So I'll briefly touch on starting with LSAT and GPA and transcripts, just because, you know, those are the numbers which are a really important part of your application, but there's not much you can do about them. So I do have a 7 tips LSAT video if you want to check that out. That's linked up above. But anyway, I'll give a little bit more background on my GPA and transcripts. So I was a double major in undergrad in the honors program, and I majored in theology and religious studies and communications. Very interesting. I think not a lot of religion majors, and I went to a Catholic school, but I ultimately went to my undergrad because of the small class sizes, and the honors program was something I was really interested in and I thought would be a good way just to get the most out of my education. You know, the classes I think ranged a little bit. I think especially with my theology courses, I did start off taking more Christian theology classes, and then after coming out halfway through college, I started to dive into other religious practices, and especially focusing on queer communities within different religious practices. So anything from, you know, research on same-sex couples in Judaism to the Hijra in Buddhism to writing my honors thesis about drag and like queer sacred spaces like gay clubs, because my senior year of college was when the Pulse shooting occurred, so the invasion of that like queer sacred space was really important to me, especially with so many sacred spaces and like religious places on campus going to Catholic school. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. You know, you see that in my transcripts just from the coursework I took. That's ultimately just like an overview of my GPA and transcripts. I got a 3.95. That is one thing to mention, I guess, that your reported GPA and your LSAC GPA are different. So, you know, depending on your major or the courses you took and all that stuff, LSAC does go through your transcripts and like tries to balance them out, because, you know, different schools have different weighted grading systems. So my LSAC cumulative GPA ended up being a 3.95, which is the one that I think law schools use, so probably the most important, you know. But sitting on webinars, I have heard that schools, I think like UPenn and other schools, do weight STEM classes differently, or they look at if there's a curve for those courses and those types of things. So I understand my GPA might be different than a lot of people's, but don't stress. Like, my majors are different. Everything about your application will likely be different than mine. So this isn't supposed to be a video to stress over those things. Just know that they do their best to make it even across the board. So for LSAT, like I mentioned, I did retake my LSAT since reapplying. So I improved my score 6 points, which I think will probably be one of the biggest factors in my reapplication process. So, you know, I would say that is super important. If you can, just try and take the LSAT once. You know, I took it 3 times, canceled my first score, applied last year with my second score, and then was offered to retake a 3rd time. So I retook it and improved my score. Since vaccinations have been rolling out and all this stuff, that made me feel confident I could do better. So, but I will say, if you can just take it once, that is preferred, because then it saves you from ever having to write like an LSAT addendum or things like that. If you just wait until you're PTing at the score you want, and hopefully you can just get that the first go, that's ideal. You know, I'm writing an LSAT addendum just because my score does have a slight percentile bump. I just don't want there to be any assumptions about my scores, so I'm trying to control that narrative with admissions. But, you know, it's kind of up to you if you write an addendum like that. But yeah, so anyway, in reapplying, my LSAT score is different, it's improved, but my GPA is the same. So moving on to letters of rec. So letters of rec, I'd say, are super important. Obviously, law schools really do look at those, it seems. And I do think my recommenders were really, really strong selections for me. I had called all of them and talked with them, and they're professors that I had known and worked closely with in undergrad. And I graduated in 2017. So I had 2 recommenders that were faculty at my university, and then one from not my current job, but my previous job, just because they could also really speak to my work ethic, leadership, time management, and my commitment to social justice, like things that I don't think my professors would necessarily think to include, but still matter to me since I have been out of school for a while. So it's appropriate for me, I think, to include. But if you're coming straight out of undergrad, you know, try and find, or even if you're not, like just trying to find those faculty is super important because you're applying to school at the end of the day. So other faculty and admissions want to know how you're going to perform in a school setting, in an educational setting, and what you'll contribute to their universities. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. But yeah, and look online, I'd say, for those like different schools, see if they mention any skills that they are looking for your recommenders to hit on. You know, some schools really want you to have leadership skills highlighted. Some really want to know if you align with their values or have great communication skills and all those types of things. So, you know, look into those things on the site. All of my letters I sent to schools, I didn't do like school specific letters. I feel like that would be pretty abnormal. But yeah, in reapplying, I think 2 of my recommenders updated their letters some, and 1 reused the same, which is totally fine. I didn't choose new recommenders when reapplying just because I thought that there were other areas of my application, like my LSAT score and my personal statement, that I could improve, and it wasn't necessarily my recommenders. I thought if anything, my recommenders probably helped me get waitlisted at so many T14 schools last year. So I really thought that the work was on me, not really on them. But you know, take into consideration if maybe there are other recommenders you should be reaching out to, and be respectful always. So, and now I'm going to move on to resume. So resume is pretty straightforward, right? For me, I've been out of school for 5 years almost. That's crazy. But yeah, so I ultimately kept my resume very straightforward. I formatted it clearly. It included all my educational involvements, like honors and awards and things like that, publications, and just like things of that nature. But because I have been out of school, I didn't include as many like officer positions or clubs I was in. I did include a few that I was highly involved in or that really fit with the narrative I was building in my application. I kept the formatting pretty straightforward. I didn't try to do anything crazy with my resume. I wanted the admissions to be able to look at it and get all the information they needed. I made sure that since I work in marketing, I didn't use lingo that admissions might not be familiar with, and I tried to make sure that I used words that schools would likely want from a candidate. So I mentioned things about time management and leading projects and correspondence and negotiating, because that is what I do at work. For me, it made a lot of sense, and I also didn't want them to look at anything on my resume and not know what I did. I think it is better to use terms that are familiar, even if there's lingo that would better communicate it to someone in your field, that's great, but you have to keep in mind who your audience is for this. So I'd say keep it straightforward, keep it simple. I would just say don't go crazy. Like, I don't think you need to go on Canva or anything wild. You can just do a Word or Google Doc, make sure everything is in there, so that way admissions just has what they need at a glance. And now we're going to talk about the personal statement, which I would argue is probably one of the most important parts of your application, outside of your, you know, data points or whatever. So this is definitely the part where I think you can be more creative and you want to be personal. Personal statement. But this is where you get to introduce yourself to admissions, you know. And I think last year my personal statement was strong. This year I think I had a lot more clarity on the narrative I was trying to build with my whole application. So the way I viewed my application was kind of like this umbrella, right? Like I have this overarching narrative that I wanted every piece of my application to support in different ways. And so my personal statement did a lot of that. It was a lot of heavy lifting, ultimately supporting the narrative that I was pushing of like being a queer person, not just caring about representation, but caring about the highest credentials of representation. You know, if you're a queer person or a person of color or part of any marginalized community that works in cis, straight, white places, you've likely encountered feeling belittled just because of how you look or identify. You know, they assume things about you based off of those identities. So for me, I want it to be able to walk into a room and no matter how effeminate I looked that day or butch. It's like a pretty butch day for me. Just knowing that I have the credentials to represent my community and also uplift and empower my community through the work I'm doing. Because, and it's like in my head, like the metaphor I use is like, I don't want a Love Simon degree, right? Like I don't, no shade if you like Love Simon, but at the end of the day, they cast straight characters to play gay roles and the plot feels very like for a straight audience, you know? Like I'm not trying to just be invited to a law school as a token. I really want to be part of the community, represent that community, give back to my community and other marginalized communities because, you know, oppression anywhere is oppression everywhere. And the whole like when the tide rises, all the boats rise, like that's the type of mentality that was kind of my overarching structure. And so then I used every single piece of my application to reaffirm that, like, how does this serve gaining the highest credentials? How does this serve my qualifications to go to this university to get those credentials? How am I going to use those credentials? Like all that type of stuff. So, and then from there I talk about my work experience and how my work experience led to going to law school. I think for me that was important as a non-traditional student, really letting admissions know like why am I choosing to pivot out of a career that I've been successful in to go to law school. And if anything, I think that that's a pretty persuasive element to include in your personal statement if that's what your situation is. I really tried to make that clear that law school is my next priority and how I plan on moving my career forward to achieve the larger goals I have and make larger systemic impacts rather than the smaller scale projects I've been currently doing. So yeah, that was kind of the flow of my personal statement. So it goes from so that was the flow of my personal statement. I started with that narrative, which was kind of how I creatively expressed myself and also came out. That's how I disclosed coming out to admissions in a way that I felt was appropriate. And if they asked me about later, I wouldn't be uncomfortable speaking about, because I know things like gender identity and sexual orientation and just other identities can be touchy and, you know, they make us who we are. So I really wanted to disclose it, but it's totally up to you on how you want to handle that. And then I moved into my work experience, talked about why my work experience leads to law school, and then ultimately why law school will allow me to do the work that I want to do. And at the end of the day, for me, it was currently being in a field in marketing. I'm in video games right now. I used to work in public health, but seeing the way that gender minorities are treated or sexual minority, or I don't even know what we call it, sexual deviants. I'm just kidding. But seeing how LGBTQ plus people of color, you know, essentially any non-cis white straight man, seeing how they're treated and not being able to advocate as I wish and being able to empower those people as I wish I could and make those changes from an industry standpoint and not just one-offs, like trying to help one person who might also feel disadvantaged in the space. Ultimately, that is why I was going to want to go to law school, and that's what I disclosed to them. I ultimately think my personal statement this year is stronger. I think I have a clearer vision and I feel less timid. You know, don't be scared. Like at the end of the day, I think the one thing I felt uncomfortable with was being so honest with why I want to do certain things, because it can be scary to put yourself out on the line about your goals and like your dreams and things you want to accomplish, knowing that those are the people who hold the key to helping you achieve those dreams. Like for me, that was intimidating, but honestly, I think the more brave and honest you can be in your application, the better. Choose a clear narrative that makes sense and run with it and just make that, you know, the best version of yourself that you can. But I didn't do anything like overly jazzy or impressive or anything, right? Like I just tried to authentically showcase who I am to admissions, why I would be a great student, why my academic achievements can speak to that, why my work experience can speak to that, and how I got to where I am. And then one thing as a reapplicant, I did mention retaking my LSAT and the investment I made and why I'm still dedicated. I think that's important to address if you're reapplying, you know, like why does this still matter to you and what over the last year, whether that's your perspective or things that have changed or solidified or whatnot. It's different for everyone, but those are things I also address. So, all right. And now we're going to get to the addendums. So that's like the bulk is like done, right? Like those are all the things that everyone has to submit. These addendums are personal to me. So if you don't want to watch this part, totally get it. But I did submit an LSAT and a diversity statement. I'll start with my LSAT addendum, very straightforward. I kept it super brief. Like I said, I took it 3 times. I just explained why those first 2 were unrepresentative of my skills as a student and why that third and best score was, which for me, I had tangible reasons. I went to the ER before my first test during the peak of COVID, which was very stressful because I had chest pain, which I thought could have been COVID, even though I didn't leave my house ever. And it ended up just being stress. Stress inflammation, probably from the LSAT. And then my second test, I had family health issues due to COVID. And so for my third one, everyone in my family had been vaccinated. Everyone was healthy. I felt much more mentally at peace release, and all of those circumstances that I couldn't control done and gone. So, and then diversity statement. So my diversity statement, I chose to take a little different approach. Like I said, I was a double major, but I don't think you see my theology and religious studies degree exemplified as much as maybe my communications degree because of my work in marketing. So I wanted to use my diversity statement to talk about my religious background, and especially being a queer religious spiritual person these days, which was a little hard to navigate because it's not something I talk about a ton in my day-to-day, especially I think as queer people. And my beliefs have just evolved so much, right, since I even obtained that degree. Those are the things I talked about in my diversity statement. It was definitely much more ideological. I don't think it's necessary to include, but for me, like I said, I thought it supported that umbrella narrative. And even going to a Catholic school, there honestly wasn't, I think there's like 20 THRS majors in my year, maybe not even. It could have been 12. Like, my capstone course was so small. Yeah, and then I guess the only final things I'll mention are scholarship essays. So, you know, those differ from school to school depending on, there's like namesake scholarships, which are like full rides usually, and other scholarships and all these different types of things. So I'd say just make sure you give yourself enough time to focus on those separately. You know, I'd finished my personal statement and other things, so I was only doing those scholarship essays at the end, which I'm grateful for because I tried to give them at least as much attention as I could to my other application materials. I didn't want them to come across weaker as far as my writing or my arguments or who I am, but also not make them redundant. So, you know, even contacting admissions and asking them about different scholarships and seeing if the people who are reviewing the scholarship are only going to see your essay or if they'll see your whole application. That was really helpful to me because then I could know how redundant I could be in some of my essays. Those are just things to keep in mind. Give yourself time on those. And then one final thing I'll mention is optional addenda. So every webinar I've sat in, admissions has said it is optional, but it is also an opportunity for us to get to know you better. So I would say take that opportunity, you know, make sure that they're still well written. I don't think they have to be as intense. So these optional addenda, you should still be professional and spell check everything, literally everything, and grammar check everything. But on that note of spell check, make sure if you're writing, I did all my stuff in Google Docs just because then I could work on them from anywhere when I was traveling or stuff for work. But I would say copy and paste it into Word or Pages or something else. I found Word to be much better because there was literally spelling errors that I could see on my Google Doc that when I hit the spell check button didn't get highlighted or noticed. From that point on, I was copying and pasting everything into Word, and even before I submitted, I did one last check. But yeah, that's everything I have as far as my application. So I hope that this was helpful. I know a lot of people are probably going to be applying soon, so best of luck. I hope that we all get into our favorite schools so we can become the next generation of empathetic and kind lawyers. But yeah, and just make sure when you're corresponding, be professional, even when it's just emails, spell check. Comment below when you get in or when you submit your apps. I'd love to know how things turn out for you. And I can't wait to post my video as well of whenever I get my admissions decisions back. So I appreciate y'all so much. I hope this was helpful. Again, like, subscribe. It really helps the channel. Turn the bell on, whatever. Give this video a thumbs up. All that stuff. But yeah, I'll see you on the internet and good luck.